There's something really valuable about stepping outside your comfort zone, about moving outside of the circles that you restrict yourself to. Even though you have a specialty and you have things that you're passionate about, such as writing and publishing, checking out something outside of your industry from experts outside of your area of expertise can often give you amazing insights and inspiration that you can apply and adapt. And that's exactly what I do in this episode of the Stark Reflections podcast.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 109 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In this episode, I'm going to share 12 takeaways from CAPS 2019. Now, CAPS is the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. It's part of an international professional speakers organization, and CAPS convention is an annual convention held in early December. This year it was held in London, Ontario, and I was there. I joined CAPS as a professional speaker in late 2017, early 2018, because I wanted to refine my speaking ability, learn from other experts in the field, and continue to engage in speaking, which I absolutely adore, if you haven't guessed, because I just babble on in this podcast. But I do enjoy speaking on the stage. I do enjoy speaking in the podcast. I love interviewing people, and I get to work with amazing professionals, not only from CAPS Canada or the Canadian professional speakers, but I get to engage with speakers from NSA in the US, and even a colleague from South Africa who's the president of the Speakers Association there. I was talking to the president of a global organization from the Netherlands at this particular conference. So CAPS allows me to interact with some amazing professionals from around the world, and it's part of the ongoing learning that I continue to do, both about writing and publishing, as well as about the business of speaking and consulting and all of those things. Now, the reason that I think it's important in a podcast for writing and publishing to talk about something like CAPS is the importance of attending conferences and workshops outside of your own industry. So in my case, 98% of the conferences that I go to are conferences related to writing and publishing. And while I like to make sure that I go to indie author or self-publishing specific conferences, I also go to traditional publishing conferences. So, for example, BEA, Book Expo America, and things like that are more geared towards traditional publishing, where 20 books to 50K is all about indie authors and self-publishing and stuff like that. So while within writing and publishing, I try to go to a diverse group of conferences, I also want to go to different professions, different conferences where there's different information, different insights, and different professionals to learn from. And I think this is important because there's so many isolated pockets of knowledge and learning within even just the indie author or the self-publishing author community. There's so many isolated pockets where there's people who all know each other, but they don't really know what's going on outside of that bubble. I mean, not that long ago, I was talking to a writer who's very successful in the indie publishing space, following the 20 books to 50K model of rapid release and series and stuff like that, making a lot of money over the last few years, but had no idea who Bella Andre, Hugh Howey, or John Locke were. And no, it's not critical to know who these people were, who were the pioneers of self-publishing. I mean, and it only goes back to, 2011. It doesn't go back that far. It's not ancient history. It's recent history. Now, I know in the digital world that, 9 years can be a long, long time, but I like to liken it to being a car manufacturer and not at least knowing who Henry Ford was or who Elon Musk are. I mean, when you're operating within an industry, it's really, really good to know who are the pioneers, who are the people who are doing new things, knowing the other companies that are involved, as opposed to just knowing your very narrow channel that you're looking at. Imagine being a basketball player without having ever heard of or understood players like Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And it's not critical to be a good basketball player, but to know who they were. But if you are a basketball player, chances are watching them and understanding them and seeing what they did and how they changed the game is important. Imagine a hockey player who doesn't know Wayne Gretzky, Gordie Howe, Sidney Crosby. It's that sort of thing. So it's not, it's not merely to pay homage to those who came before, but it's also to understand the bigger landscape of the game you're playing in or of the systems that you're working within. I think that's really, really good because it allows for context and it allows for understanding within the realm that a person operates. It allows a wonderful perspective. And so just like there are isolated pockets that exist within traditional publishing, and there are isolated pockets that exist in so many ways, in so many different professions for some folks. So for me, CAPS brings in professional speakers from all walks of life with expertise and specialties from across the board. You name it, there's someone there who has a specialty that you never even imagined was a specialty, that this is what they do. These are the consulting opportunities they offer. These are the ways that they speak to groups. They speak to executives. They do one-on-one counseling or coaching with people. These are the ways they inspire and motivate people to learn and to grow. And so for me, there's an amazing opportunity for learning from a completely different perspective from so many of the wonderful people I get to interact with at CAPS. Now, while I was there, I brought my nearly 30 years of experience in the book industry to the table in presenting in a Meet the Expert session that they had one of the mornings. But the people that I interacted with brought me their own insights and knowledge from so many other areas that I could learn and benefit from. And so this episode is going to be 12 takeaways that I took from CAPS Convention 2019 that I'm going to apply to my own writer experience and hopefully adapt those into things that you can think about for your own writing and publishing career. But before we do that, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor. This podcast is sponsored by Findaway Voices. For this episode, I'm sharing an excerpt from an article from the Findaway Voices blog from author Karen Williams, who decided to release her new book, Becoming an Authority, with Findaway Voices as an audiobook first. Now, here are 5 reasons that she decided to launch audiobook first. Number 1, the audiobook market is the fastest growing area in digital publishing. According to the Publishers Association, audiobook downloads hit a record of £31 million in sales in 2017, up 22% on the previous year. Number 2, Karen says, many of my clients have been asking for my advice on how best to approach creating an audiobook, so I wanted to experience this method first before recommending it to others. Number 3, as becoming an authority is for business experts who want to stand out in their business and be seen as a thought leader, it made perfect sense for me to do the same. How can I advocate something that I'm not prepared to do myself? Number 4, I thought this would be an interesting experiment. Becoming an Authority is my 6th book, and my other books, and clients' books, have been produced in both print and ebook format. I'm pretty well versed with the writing and publishing process, and I thought it would be interesting to do something different with my next book. Number 5, I can put together a blueprint to support those who want to produce an audiobook that will help them through the entire process. Now, the full article from Karen Williams appears on an October 29, 2019 post on the Findaway Voices blog, and you can learn more about Findaway Voices and how you can take advantage of audiobooks as an indie author or small publisher over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. For my personal update, I did the launch of an author's guide to working with libraries and bookstores, which came out on December 10th, 2019. Now, this was scheduled way back when. Well, it wasn't scheduled all that long ago because it was an accidental book. It was based on content that you guys, awesome listeners, asked me about to talk about bookstores and libraries. And I thought it would be a very small book, a thin book, probably 10 to 15,000 words, very similar to the 7 P's of publishing success. But I ended up writing over 65,000 words, cutting it back down in the edits to about 55,000 words, and that was released December 10th. Now, it was happening while I was at CAPS, so there's kind of like oh yeah, my book's coming out today, I better go do some things. For example, on the on the Monday night, I didn't socialize at the CAPS conference. I went back to the hotel room so I could work on getting some of that extra content for resources that are mentioned in the book out there. But so I haven't really done any marketing other than, mentioning on Facebook or Twitter, hey, I got a new book out. And thank you everyone for the support. I mean, overwhelming comments and the shares and the purchases, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for all that support. Again, I didn't do any actual marketing. The amazing community of people that I know helped elevate that book to hit number 1 in all 3 categories on Kobo, at least here in Canada, that I could see, as well as I got into the top 10 on at least one category on Amazon, which was really, really exciting. And of course, I didn't even realize that Joanna Penn also released her awesome new book, which I can't wait to read, Productivity for Authors, or that Sean Platt and Johnny B. Truant released the fiction formula on the same day. So I'm competing with, powerhouses of the indie publishing community. And both those books are, of course, no surprise, ranking much higher than my own. Well-deserved, of course. But I'm at least honored to be trailing behind them and even temporarily sharing the top 10 spot with them. Even if the moment is fleeting, I will take it to stand among cool folks like that. Now, in terms of your comments and tweets, lots of love in the community that I'm going to be sharing. Dale Ivan Smith said on Twitter, as a soon-to-be retired librarian who had the library side of this question a number of times over the year, it's great to see this resource. And as a soon-to-be full-time writer, I look forward to using it myself. Thanks, Dale. Glad that you appreciate that both as an author and as a librarian. Rachel Amphlett said on Twitter, whether you're indie or trad published, buy this book. It's packed with all the information you need to start 2020 with a bang. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you for being an early reader and helping me with some of the content on the book and making sure I wasn't missing certain really critical aspects as they pertain to libraries, as well as the awesome resources that you shared that you said I can share with readers of the book on tracking for when you're contacting libraries. So awesome. And you get to see some of those examples from the resources from the book from Rachel. And Rachel's a past guest from this podcast. You can also listen to my interview with her there. Another tweet came from VoiceMap. Now, they were featured in episode 105. They tweeted a fun promotional tweet about one of my ghost walking tours that you can purchase through VoiceMap for Hamilton, Ontario. And I love that they tweeted out, encounter resident phantom souls on this haunted tour through central Hamilton with Mark Leslie. That's kind of cool. And I love the fact that they're actually sharing their tours with different communities and using the proper hashtags, etc., so that people in the right areas can find them. And I love that as an amazing new opportunity for writers, again, with audio. And Linda Potvin said, indie authors, if you're published wide or you're considering it, Mark Leslie's book, Killing It on Kobo, is a goldmine of information about the Kobo Writing Life platform. Well worth checking out. Yeah, thank you, Linda. It's so cool. I mean, it's so fun to see people discovering and finding a book that I've published earlier, a year ago. And I think the reason I wanted to share that is it's really, really important that, because while this book was new to me a year and a half ago, maybe it was a year ago, I can't remember when I released it, and it was all exciting and you're thinking about your new books, there are people still discovering your books that are enjoying them and benefiting from them well after. And so thanks, Linda, for that for the promotion, for sharing that, as well as for the reminder. And I want to also thank my patrons of the podcast, and call out a special thank you to existing patron Ember Casey, who recently increased her monthly pledge. Thank you, Ember. And thank you to all the patrons for your monthly pledges of either $1, $3, or $5, which go toward my time in producing and maintaining relevant content for this show. Now, patrons like Ember get access to additional content. Most recently, a short blooper reel audio of something that I cut from a recent episode, so you can hear me tripping over my tongue and cursing when things go wrong, or the animals are doing goofy things in the background, making noise and having to re-record stuff. But I also included a peek into the unedited, unabridged version of recording of the audiobook for my latest book, The Author's Guide to Working with Libraries and Bookstores, because I wanted you patrons to get an insight into. This was the raw, real, unedited, you hear me clear my throat, you hear me cough, you hear me yell at the cats when they're doing something goofy. And then, of course, the finished product will have all that removed. And also the audio will be enhanced and adjusted a little bit as I walk through the process to make that professional. But patrons get access to stuff like that. And so patrons at the $3 or more range will get full access to the 2 different audio versions as well of my book, The 7 Ps of Publishing Success. So both the one that I narrated, as well as the 99-cent version, which uses a computer-generated voice, not my voice, which is soon going to be available, but using a Brian, a British male voice. So if you want to hear it in a more sophisticated voice, but a little bit computerish, you can get it for 99 cents or $6.99. But my patrons got access to both of those books completely for free. And you can find out how you can be a patron of the podcast for $1 or $3 or $5 a month over at patreon.com/starkreflections. But that's enough of the introductory matter for this podcast. There will be no post-main matter reflection because I was already reflecting at the beginning, and the whole episode is basically reflections. So without further ado, let's get on to the main content for episode 109. As mentioned, this is going to be 12 takeaways from CAPS Convention 2019. Now, this is only 12 things, and there was so much more content, so many pages of notes. I think 25 pages of notes I took, and I didn't even make it to all the sessions. For only $39, I was able to buy all of the audio because they recorded all of the tracks. So there were multiple tracks at times. There were like 4 or 5 different options to go to, and I wanted to be at least 2 or 3 of them. So it was an easy thing to purchase the content, which I'm going to be getting, which is going to be fantastic. So I know there's going to be dozens of other things that I took away, but these are 12 things that I took away that I think could also potentially apply to you as a writer. And I believe I got everyone's names right, and I wrote it down. I might have gotten confused because early on I wasn't necessarily writing down who I was listening to, so I may have gotten them wrong, but I believe these are the people who said that. So let's start with number 1. Number 1, Donald Cooper said, "Thinking is the work," and asked, how much time do you spend thinking? New insights keep you relevant and keep you passionate. And this is kind of an important thing. So he's talking to speakers, obviously, but I'm going to apply this to writers and thinking about when you think about, as a consultant or as a speaker, how much time do you spend thinking, which is a very important thing for you to consider, because a lot of the ideas and a lot of the things you do and the plans and the strategies and the business come from that reflective thinking. And it's the same thing as a writer. We focus so much on how much time is spent at the keyboard and how much time is spent typing up the words and getting those words out there. But let's go back to the importance of thinking. I was just listening to Joanna Penn's recent podcast where she interviewed Kevin J. Anderson, and Kevin talked about dictating his novels. He dictates while he hikes the mountains of Colorado and records them, and that's the first draft that gets typed up for him, and then he writes the second draft, does the second draft in front of the keyboard. But Kevin said he started off by just going for a walk and thinking about, let's say, I'm going to think about this character and their background. And so he'd started taking audio notes because he would think about it and then he would get back and forget half of the things he thought about. And that was his progression into actually dictating the story, because it became notes and ideas and things, and then it became scenes, and then he slowly developed the skill to do that, which I think is just fascinating and interesting to learn in and of itself. But thinking about that aspect of your writing, when you're doing something else, when you're walking the dog, when you're washing the dishes, when you're going for a run, when you're taking a walk, when you're commuting somewhere, that very important reflective thinking that you do that ends up going into your book. Whether it's a fiction book, whether it's a nonfiction book, whatever it is that you're writing, don't forget that that is the actual work you're doing. You're creating things, you're making things up, or you're putting words together to share your experiences, emotions, ideas, etc. But a lot of the hard work for writing is thinking. And so the question Donald asks, and I'm asking you as a writer, is how much time do you spend or dedicate to thinking? Because that's where a lot of the insights will come from. Number 2, Mimi Brown said, let silence do the heavy lifting. And Mimi's great session, and this was like negotiating as a speaker for your speaker fees and stuff like that. She talked about the importance of silence, something you can potentially use in a job interview as well. But Mimi was talking about this in relation to negotiations, but it's also something that can be useful in the craft of writing. So it's part of the show don't tell, right? Also part of maybe trusting the reader and not having to hit them over the head with something. So basically planting an idea and letting the reader's mind take that to the next level, not having to over-explain something, which can actually kick someone out of a story. So I love the fact that she's talking about that for one aspect, but there's a way to apply that silence in your writing or those spaces. I even think about manuscript format and stuff I've learned from Dean Wesley Smith when he talked about looking at a physical, a printout or on the screen of a manuscript that's a big block of dense text, or there's lots of spaces, in the variety and the change up in the text itself, just the way it looks can scare off a reader as well. So that silence that Mimi talked about can be applied in so many different ways. Number 3, George Saunders. When he was talking about game changers, he said, what if the game changes you? And that was a really interesting thing for him to say. Now, Game Changers was a thing that they did at CAP. So they did these short, almost like TED-style talks, 2-minute, 5-minute little segments that would come up and be game changers. And a speaker would come up and talk about something game-changing that they did in their business and their speaking career that made a significant difference. A small change that became a big thing. And so towards the end of the conference, George, who was the MC of the show, his sort of last talk said, what if the game changes you? And that made me think about that. And it made me think about back to, so specifically for writers, thoughts on why you write. Is it purely for the money? I.e., if you're doing rapid release publishing, which is mostly a Kindle Unlimited gamification trend right now in publishing, or are you writing for the stories to reach readers, to change people if it's nonfiction and you have expertise to help them with, or it's to entertain them, and what you're giving them is offering them is the value of escaping. Why are you writing, and has the game changed you? And I do believe in writing to market, and it's important to at least understand the market for a book that you write. But I also believe in the importance of writing something that you're passionate about and that you believe in. And I can see that there is a question out there, particularly with all the different trends and the chasing the ball and the opposite sides of the field and all the crazy things that are more related to how to gamify and how to market and how to promote. I think it's important for you as a writer, as a creative person, as a reflective, to wonder, what if the game changes you? Something to at least be aware of, and I like that. I know that's not specifically where George went, but he said that, and it made me think about that, and so I wanted to share that with you. Number 4, David Arvin. He said, I wasn't spending my money on food. I was spending it on the experience. So this was part of a story David was sharing of being a kid, and it was a while back, and spending his weekly allowance. So he got $1.50 on a weekly allowance. And what he did is every Saturday morning, he and his friends would get on their bikes, and the dog would run along beside him, and they would go down to Burger King, and he would buy a $1.49 Whopper combo meal. And David was talking about the experience, because his dad was like, why are you spending all of your money on food? You have food in the house. You can eat anytime. It wasn't the food, it was the experience. And that's really, really critical. David followed by talking about, the difference between customer service and customer experience and that approach. And I think about that in the same way when I think about writing, is they're not spending money on a book. They're spending money on the experience. Is there something that your book is going to teach them? Is there a beautiful experience that you're giving to them? Stuff you made up that they're going to enjoy and they're going to imagine. They're going to see these people and the dialogues and the trials and tribulations and the stories and the emotions that you put down on paper. They're not just buying a book. They're buying an experience. And that's an important thing, particularly when you think about the value of your book and the way that you place that into the community. That's the value. And we're going to talk about that at another point, but I did want to think about that and remind you that that's exactly what you're selling. You're not selling a book, you're selling an experience. Number 5, this is also from David Arvin. Your job isn't to knock it out of the park for an hour. It's how you help prepare and inspire people for the next year on their journey. Now, David's talking about a speaker, like a speaker's role in serving the audience, from the stage. So, like a keynote for an hour, for example. And when I think about that, I like to think about you and your writing and your books. Going back to the previous point, is your role to entertain them? Is your role to make a bestseller list? Or is your book something that resonates with them, has meaning, and is something that they hold with them and cherish years later? I had people approach me from the conference this year who picked up my book, The 7 P's of Publishing Success, last year and said, thank you so much. That book helped me along the way. And so when I think about that, I think about that was a case of nonfiction, but in the case of fiction, writing and reading is magic. Think about your favorite novel that you read. It might have been something you read years ago that still resonates with you. For me, it's, a novel like John Irving's A Prayer for Owen Meany is still one that I go back to. Or I have George R. Stewart's Earth Abides, or Stephen King's 4 novellas that are collected together in different seasons. Those are books I read years and years ago, but they still stick with me. Because writing and reading is magic. It can change lives. And that's part of what you're creating when you write. It's the ability to connect and resonate with someone that you'll probably never meet. But again, it's not just about the experience that they have while they're reading and learning, however it is the book that you put out there, but it's something that they'll have with them that'll last them, like David said, on the next year or years into the future. This is David Arvin again. And David said, you are always on. And this is related to a story he shared when he was a musician, and he was young in his early 20s, and he was playing at a wedding, and it was just whatever, and they were goofing around and doing stuff on stage, and maybe not taking everything so seriously. And a gentleman walked up, an older gentleman walked up to him during a break, walked up to him, called him forward, and basically said, I have 2 things to say to you. 1, someone is always watching, and 2, you're getting paid for this. And then he walked away. And that's something that David held with him as a really, really important lesson. There is somebody always watching. You're getting paid for this. This is a thing. So I kind of think it speaks to both your brand as an author and professionalism and the way you behave at all times. Because even if you're not specifically performing, even if it's not specifically something related to, marketing your work or whatever, you are technically always on, and your brand is out there, and it's affected by those things that you do. So again, I think it's an important thing to remember. I can say this as somebody who has worked and continues to work with players in the industry, is that we're paying attention to author behavior, even if it's not towards yourself or whatever. Like when I was at Kobo, for example, paid a lot of attention to how people spoke and shared and how they treated others, how they treated other businesses, how they treated other authors. You're always on. People are always paying attention. Number 6, Gair Maxwell. Your job is to create something worthy of sharing. And he was saying this in terms of video and the use of video for promoting your own brand as a speaker, consultant, etc., or whatever your expertise was. But that's just so important as well when I think about your job as a creative person, your job as a writer, and your job is to create something. Create something that is so good, so meaningful, as we talked about, that stays with them, but it doesn't just stay with them, but it's so good that they want to share. I read some quotes on Twitter earlier in this episode where I spoke, where Linda had discovered my book, Killing It on Kobo. She didn't just enjoy it, but she shared a review of it. And she didn't just share a review of it, she tweeted about it because it was an experience that she felt was worth sharing because she got something of value of that. So that's your job as a writer, is to create something that moves someone. Again, whether it's information or whether it's entertainment, or it just allows them to discover these worlds and these characters. Is it something that they go, oh my God, this was such a great book, you've got to read it. It had me on the edge of my seat. Your job as a writer is to create something worthy of sharing. Number 8. Ben Moorsom, and this was in a panel discussion on neuroscaping. So they're specifically talking about the setup for the room and where the screens were in relation to the audience and how to connect with an audience and all of this amazing neuroscaping material. But in that, he said, black is a powerful slide, just like silence is a powerful sound. And he talked about very specifically using that to draw people back to the speaker for particular points, especially if there's slides with information on it, but you want to draw their attention down there. So I think this goes back to something I spoke about earlier in one of the earlier points, the importance that Mimi spoke about with silence. And remember that that's really, really important as well. So when you're writing a scene, this is maybe more about the craft of writing, but when you're writing a scene, the things that you leave out, the gaps that you leave, the silences, the things you don't share can be just as powerful as the things that you share, because that's what paints an ultimate picture, is those things that aren't there, the things that you allow the reader to intuit by leaving them out. And in a case of a mystery, for example, that may be like a black herring sort of thing, where you leave out just enough information that they fill in the gap. And if you paint it a certain way, you can have them believe something based on stuff you don't say. It's really, really powerful in the craft of writing. And I know I don't get into the craft of writing very much, but I still thought it was valuable. It tied back to Mimi's point, and I wanted to talk about that as well. Number 9, Kelly Swanson. And her specialty is story and the value of story as a speaker. And so I loved her sessions. I went to 3 of those. One of the things she said is, we focus on the transfer of information and not about getting people to care. And that's where the story comes in. And I guess that's really important, because if you're a writer of fiction, then you already value the elements of story. But I think this is something I fall prey to, and maybe this is just a reflection for me, but there's probably other people out there like me. When I go to do a presentation, or when I go to share my insights and information about the industry, I have so much information and almost 30 years of experience to share, but sometimes I'm so excited with telling people information that sometimes just getting dry information is not as valuable as understanding the story or the people. So whether it's a story about myself and something I've experienced, or whether I'm talking about an author that I know or worked with, or I understand something that they did, think about the difference between me saying something like, wow, it's really different today, because back in the day you would type things up and mail them and then wait for the gatekeepers of publishing, but now I can write things up in Word and upload them and have an EPUB created, and it can be published within 12 hours. As opposed to going back and explaining the story of me pounding away on a typewriter when I was 14 years old, and mailing the story with all my hopes and dreams, and saving up my allowance money so I can mail it off to a publisher, so that I would wait patiently every day, going to the mailbox and looking and hoping that I would get the acceptance letter in there, and every day it was empty. And then I would come back the next day, still excited and eager, and just get devastated every single day. And then finally, 6 months later, after daily looking at the mailbox and hoping and praying and wishing, there it is, the letter in the mailbox. And I open up the mailbox and I take it in my hands and I see it, and it's my self-addressed stamped envelope. But that's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean a rejection. It's still a 50-50 chance. They've actually read my manuscript. They've actually sent something back. And I open it and I take it out and I see, we're sorry, but we don't find this suitable at the time. And that's the devastation that I used to have to face, because then I would go and package up the manuscript again, put all my hopes and dreams into an envelope and send it away, hoping that within 6 months or so, I could find out if I was good enough to be a published author. Well, that changed significantly for me in 2004 when I discovered I had the power and I had the ability to get those works out there into the market and into readers' hands, so that the readers could decide if it was good, not some gatekeeper in New York or Toronto. So that's the difference, right? Talking about the elements or the details or the facts, or sharing a personal story about how I experienced that. Now, I was just making that up on the fly, of course, so it wasn't practice, so I hope you forgive me for some of the goofiness there. But again, that's the message Kelly's trying to say, is about getting people to care. Maybe you felt sorry for this poor loser guy like me when you're getting those rejections in the mail. But that's part of the story. That's part of making you think about the information through the character's perspective. Number 10, this is also Kelly Swanson. And Kelly said there's a difference in telling people what to do and making them want to do it. And again, very similar. And again, it's from really classic storytelling, show don't tell in a way. Showing them something and empowering them or encouraging them or inspiring them to want to do something is a lot different. And I'm going to use an example that I was recently thinking about. Is I had done a talk. It was kind of like a lunchtime talk at a local writers group, and they just wanted to understand my journey and story through publishing. And again, I shared, being rejected and discovering digital and my goals and getting professional rates from short stories and how that migrated. And then I talked about some of the experimentations I had done in publishing. And people seemed to enjoy it. It was kind of fun. It was filled with all kinds of stories of my own writing career. And then it was probably a year or a year and a half later, I was in the same region at a different event, and I was about to do a workshop. I think it was probably for Kobo. I was sharing, here's some tips on how you can work with Kobo, whatever. And just as I was preparing and getting the slides up and ready and stuff, and the audience was shuffling into the theater area, a couple people approached me on stage and said, "We saw your talk at this breakfast last year, and we just want to let you know, thanks to you and your inspiration, we decided to publish this book. Specifically, we're inspired by something you said. We took the idea and we created our own thing that you helped us with. So thank you so much." And they signed it and gave me a copy of it. So again, I didn't tell people to go and do this. They came up with it all on their own. But something in what I had shared with them made them want to do something. What I love about that is they didn't just do something that I said you should do. They did their own thing, inspired by something I shared. Really, really powerful. And they demonstrated taking that information and adapting it for their own purposes, which I absolutely love. Number 11, Mimi Brown. Price is only an issue in the absence of value. Now, again, Mimi was talking about, price for speaking engagements and consulting and stuff like that. And this was a lesson about speaker fees and undervaluing yourself. But it's a huge, huge lesson on authors who undervalue their work. We've spoken about the book connecting with people, inspiring them, the way it's going to change them, the way it's going to stick with them, the experience that you're actually giving them, the knowledge and insights and passion and stories that you're giving them. And we look at the indie author community, and a lot of us, especially if we're beginning, we say, well, who am I to write this book? So, for example, I could say, well, Joanna Penn is well-known and respected in the industry, and look, she's amazing. She's had a podcast for 10 years. She's got all these fantastic books, and she's insightful and forward-thinking. So, of course, people are going to pay, I don't know what book is priced at. They're going to pay $10 for her book, but they're not going to pay $10 for my book, because who am I? I'm just this guy who doesn't have as many books out. He's not as well-known. What kind of things would I have? And it's the same thing. You say, well, I write horror novels. I'm not Stephen King. I can't command all the kinds of things he gets. You have to remember that when you're pricing yourself in a market, the price is only an issue when there's less value there. And so all things being equal, I'm looking for a book that I want to read in this topic, in this area, in this genre that looks good and is professionally done. Oftentimes the reader only cares about the question, is this a book that I am likely to enjoy or learn from, etc.? And is that a reasonable price? So yeah, when you look at the market and you understand the value, understand the full value, the length of the book, the amount of time that it's going to take someone to read through it, and the investment that they put into it, rather than always just saying, oh, I need to price this really, really low because nobody knows who I am. If you've done your job properly, if it's been edited properly, if the description on the book is compelling and it's ad copy and it's sales copy and it's a professionally put together book that's been edited, etc., there's no reason why a customer can't pay a reasonable price for it. So take a look at the top 10, the top 20 prices in your category. What's the low range? What's the high range? I like to start somewhere in the middle and kind of adjust based on the length of the book, etc., so that I know that I'm not overcharging or I'm not undercharging. So again, price is only an issue in the absence of value. Number 12, Lisa Longball Vlooswyk, who is a professional golfer, says, every time you say yes or no to something, run it through your written commitment. And she talks about the value, and it's a psychological thing that if you actually write with your hand, a handwritten note of your commitment, what are you committing to do? And every time an opportunity comes up and you have to say yes or no to it, pause, take a look at that commitment, which she recommends you post on the wall, like let's say near your writing space or somewhere that you see on a regular basis, maybe over the mirror when you're brushing your teeth every morning or something like that. Run that through your commitment and recognize if saying yes or saying no gets you closer to that commitment. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. I still had for years the quote from Hugh Prather, if the desire to write is not accompanied by actual writing, then the desire is not to write. And it reminded me when I got distracted in all those other goofy things that weren't actual writing, that if the desire to write is not accompanied by actual writing, your desire isn't to write. And that was something that I held with me, and I found that a really, really valuable exercise. Now that was my commitment to want to produce and remind myself the joy that I actually get when I am writing, when I am creating. And that maybe is not a long-term strategy in any sort of business sense, but thinking about that, you have opportunities to be experiment and do all kinds of things. You're getting bombarded with ideas all the day, but maybe running it through or filtering it through some sort of specific commitment and asking yourself whether or not it takes you away from it. Now, it can be fun. It could be, hey, well, this is not going to get me to my commitment, but I need the relaxation. I need to go see this movie. I need to binge watch this show on Netflix, because maybe that's part of my thinking. Maybe that's part of something that's going to inspire me. So maybe in an offhanded way, I suspect it's going to help. But being very conscious and being very deliberate about those things, I think, is really, really important. And a bonus, number 13. I know I said 12, but 12 just sounds nicer, and 13 seems like an unlucky number. But of course, this is coming out for Friday, December 13th, so why not throw in a lucky 13? So this is Clay Hebert, who said, let's kill the elevator pitch. He did an amazing job explaining where the term came from. The elevator pitch is the idea that, you have this one line that when someone asks you what your book is about, for example. Now, I know he's talking about the elevator pitch for businesses and speakers, and he had a great session where he talked about, what do you do? And responding not with this long, boring life story, but actually like, what do you do? And thinking about what you do from, this is what you do to help and improve people's lives. And it's more about them than it is about you. And that's a critical thing to remember. But I'm thinking about the elevator pitch from a writer perspective in terms of, the elevator pitch for your book, which you often think about, bumping into an agent or an editor, and you've only got a couple floors to get to get the story to them. Here's the thing he says about elevator pitches. He says, 1, it doesn't actually happen. 2, nobody wants to be pitched. Nobody wakes up in the morning, he says, and says, hey, as they're brushing their teeth, I can't wait for somebody to pitch me something that I had no idea to see. And 3, you're not in that business anyways. So it's kind of an important thing that, while it's important to be able to narrow down your book to something interesting that can hook people, he went on to explain giving them something that's sort of insightful and inspiring and intriguing, maybe not information laden, so that the natural response is they lean in and say, oh, well, how do you do that? Or tell me more. Because that's kind of what you want. You want to engage someone in a back and forth conversation that they participate in, not in being sold to or pitched to. Really, really hard for us to do, particularly when we get excited about the things that we've produced. But I think that was really, really valuable. And I missed his detailed session. That was one of the ones I couldn't attend. So I'm looking forward to listening to the audio for that, because it's sort of a workshop to go back to, when somebody asks you the question, what do you do? He has this amazing way of walking you through discovering and sharing what it is you're actually doing that changes people's lives in a positive way, and communicating that in a way that can inspire them to go, oh, wow, how do you do that? Tell me more, that sort of thing. And maybe even in a way that can help the person you're talking to with some of the information and insights that you have. Well, that's it for this episode and the reflections on the 13 things that I learned from CAPS Convention 2019. Again, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. Thanks for being a listener to the podcast. If you like this episode or you like the podcast in general, please feel free to share it with a friend. You can tweet it out. You can share the links from starkreflections.ca to this episode or any episode, or feel free to please leave me a review on the podcatcher of your choice. Again, thanks for listening. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. I will be coming to you, I'm going to be recording episode 110 very shortly just to get it out there and pre-produced for the 20th, because I am going to be traveling in the next couple of weeks. But until next week, when you're actually hearing the next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.